Why isn't the U.S. doing more to secure our country? Fentanyl and record numbers of illegal immigrants are flooding our borders. Ed Calderon spent 12 years policing the most violent drug cartels in Mexico. He says America's enemies are working with criminal organizations and fueling anti-American sentiment in Mexico to destabilize the United States. He also gives some advice on how to become more self-reliant in a world that is becoming more violent. Ed, I know you were born and raised in Mexico. You lived in Mexico your entire life, but your English is perfect.
Thank you. Thank you.
Tell me about your background.
I was born and raised in Tijuana, Mexico, and that's right on the border. Tijuana is a very tourist town in a lot of ways. When I was growing up there, I was born in 1982. So Americans were everywhere. Commerce is tied directly to the American dollar. So in schools down there, you are taught English early. And it's almost like a prerequisite to be able to get a degree in any way down there. So I learned how to speak it and how to understand it by watching TV. Mr. Rogers was pretty instrumental in that. But later on, I actually had to go to language school to get better, clear English if I wanted to pursue any sort of career. Slowly but surely, I had to get rid of the accent. The less accent you have, the better the pay in some situations. And when I went to work for the government, they had a keen interest in me being able to speak it very clearly, so I could speak to people over the phone and listen to conversations or pass myself off as an American or a deportee in Mexico and listen to things around me, I guess.
So you kept honing that skill, basically.
Yes. It is something I pay a lot of attention to because, one, back then it was a survival thing. I couldn't be caught just being a Mexican in some of the environments that I was in. So I had to pretend to be an American deportee so I can listen to some of the things that were going around in some of the areas where we were operating.
You were talking a little bit about your work. Tell me a little bit about that. What did you do in Mexico and what eventually brought you here? You live in the United States now.
Yeah. I didn't have a lot of options as far as work. It was post 9/11 Mexico, and 9/11 basically killed the tourism industry, and a lot of the economy basically went into a recession of a sort in Mexico. I was studying medicine. I was on my second year of that, and that was great. And then money ran out, and I couldn't afford to be on that career path anymore. Saw an ad in the newspaper for unmarried, childless, young, motivated people that wanted to take part in this experimental police force that they were trying to develop down there. And I didn't see all the red flags about that, and I just went and signed up, despite the objections of my parents. It was basically almost a paramilitary police force. The people in charge of our training were all from the military special forces. What I thought was going to be community policing of some sort turned into operational policing in one of the most dangerous city on the planet at that time, which was my hometown of Tijuana. Did that for 12 years, working against some of the most dangerous criminal organizations on the planet, basically. Under the command of a man named Lieutenant Colonel Izola, pretty legendary lawman down there. I did that for 12 years.
So you were fighting cartels, basically, exposing cartels, trying to do the right thing. When I think of police in Mexico, I don't exactly think about people who do the right thing.
Yes.
Do I have a skewed perspective?
I'm sad to say that you don't. It is with a lot of pain in my heart that I say this, that Mexico has a very big problem with the corruption at all levels, all the way to the top and all the way to the bottom. And while I was making my way from the bottom to the top, I got to see some of those things. All of us were put through FBI background checks and verifications because of the nature of the work we were going to do and our interaction with the U.S. law enforcement. They tried their best to keep us all honest. They monitored our financials. They did surprise house visits and counted the number of TVs in our houses and asked us if we had anything new. They tried with us. And the only successes in that period of the drug war, I'm talking about 2007, 2012, the only historical successes in that war were in the places that we operated. It's specifically with they put a lot of time, money, and effort into keeping us clean. But with a lot of things in Mexico, those things only last for about 5 years or 6 years, which is a presidential term. And once they end, anything that succeeded in that term, if it's from the other political party, it gets discarded.
Did you know that going into it?
I was a young, idealistic man. I didn't know what was going on. I put a bunch of effort into it and did my best to just maintain myself. And I found myself seeing members of the group that I work with coming back to work after being gone for 3 or 4 years because they were let go because they didn't pass the background checks or they failed the polygraph exam. But the new government said that they can come back because that was unconstitutional for them to be fired because of those things. So I found myself now working with the same people that I was hunting in a lot of ways.
Oh my gosh.
So I had to leave.
How does a Mexican medical school dropout make the choice between joining law enforcement in Mexico, which is corrupt, or joining the cartels, which is dangerous? I don't know if I'd use the word corrupt because,
it's a complex thing. And obviously many of my family members didn't know that I was a police officer for the longest time. It's not something you would share. It's almost like it's a thing you would guard and keep quiet about, but there's also shame to it.
There's shame in being in law enforcement.
Yes.
Is there shame in being part of the cartels?
No, there's actually that's a big reason why things are upside down in Mexico, because they're the Robin Hoods,
Wow.
and law enforcement and the government is the bad guys in a lot of cultural things down there. So my choices were limited. It was that or join a call center and work at a call center down there. And I actually tried to work at a call center, and they called me back for the job after I was already on the ground with a rifle in my hands working. So basically, it's like me. A lot of young Mexicans don't have opportunities in Mexico. Mm-hmm. That's the main issue. The main issue of what feeds some of these criminal organizations. There's a lot of young people that are very motivated. They want to work. They want to better their lives. But there's no opportunities. That's why they come here, or that's why they join the cartels.
Mm. Can you give some background on what has happened with the cartels over the last 3 years? I know that there have been some significant changes. Was it since 2020?
Yeah. So most of what you're seeing now is basically a concentration of two major forces in Mexico. There's many small groups across the country. Numbers fluctuate, 50 organizations to 60. But the largest organizations down there are the Sinaloa Cartel, or the Federation of Cartels from Sinaloa. There's not a cohesive group. And the New Generation Cartel, which is a ultra-violent, highly militarized, expansive organization of people. They are slowly but surely taking control of a lot of the major Mexican ports in Mexico. And taking control of the highway of fentanyl into this country, along with trying to control border segments. So right now, what you see is a few cartels controlling some of the border segments of between Mexico and the United States. Since they control that segment, they control pretty much whatever crosses that border. And the New Generation Cartel, even though it's kind of the second largest cartel in Mexico, it doesn't have control over a major section of that border. But when that happens, that's gonna mean that some of that violence is gonna start spilling over here, because now they have a corridor for their people to come here, and their weapons and whatever else they might want to bring in here. The differences are these: Sinaloa Cartel and some of the members of it have traditionally played it low key. They kept violence down. They favor the town people. They build roads.
They're the Robin Hoods.
They're the Robin Hoods. The New Generation Cartel,
they don't care.
They want to control. They want to expand. They're not about the lifestyle. You won't see them wearing the pointy boots and the hats. They're going to be showing up in full military equipment with a single disruptor, so people can't phone the authorities. It's a different animal as far as a group of people.
Why are they like that? What's driving that?
So they were formed originally as a Sinaloa cartel entity to fight the Zetas. The Zetas were basically a group of special forces members from the Mexican army that left the job and went to work for one of the major cartels down there. They started expanding and threatening the stability and the power structure of the Sinaloa cartel, so they came up with their own unit, and which they call the Matazetas, the Zeta killers. And some of these original members of that group became really well equipped and versed in moving around Mexico and fighting some of these criminal organizations. What you saw then is that they figured out that they can start their own cartel, which is usually what happens. The original founder of that cartel is a man by the name of Nemesio Ceguera Cervantes, a former police officer like myself, um, who has who had a lot of experience in that realm. When he started his organization, he basically started recruiting a lot of ex-military and ex-police officers with a different mindset, basically expansionistic, militarized, organized in that way, more hyper-violent and more specifically oriented towards control and expansion. It's not a luxury group like the Sinaloa cartel that wants to, be in the limelight or expose themselves. They've learned the lessons of the past. So they're very much the current iteration of a cartel group, more underground, more militarized, more performing more like a clandestine military organization in a lot of ways, and also expansive, developing relationships with foreign countries in a lot of ways and foreign entities to try and put some of the precursors and fentanyl into this country. So it's a different organization.
I guess they created a monster. They gave birth to a monster.
I think a lot of the aspects of the drug war, what they call the drug war, going after certain cartels and not going after others, arresting one cartel head and making three. I think a lot of that has produced what we're into now, which is basically a survival fight between two large major drug organizations in Mexico, which is both the Sinaloa cartel and the New Generation cartel.
Are they fighting each other? Are they fighting
Yes.
against one another?
Yes. A lot of the violence you're seeing in a lot of these places where they are both vying for power. One of the biggest examples of that is my hometown of Tijuana. Tijuana has presence of the New Generation cartel and the Sinaloa cartel. Tijuana is also next to San Diego in California, which is one of the largest drug routes on the planet, one of the richest ones. So they're fighting for control of that area. Another aspect of this that it's changed is that a lot of Americans are now moving down to Mexico, and with them, they're taking their drug market. So the fights are now happening down there because they're fighting for control of markets that are being now produced and created by Americans living down there. And they don't have to move their drugs up here to sell them in the street corner, or not all of them. Now they sell down there as well. So a lot of the violence is basically directed towards drug markets, control, and the New Generation cartel wants to expand in the United States. That's their main thing.
When you talk about them, the new generation being more power hungry and having larger aspirations than other cartels, what does that actually mean? What does that mean vis-a-vis the U.S. or even the world? What does expansion mean to them?
Historically, the Sinaloa cartel for the past 20, almost 30 years, they've had a presence in the United States, within the United States. Historically, some people say that the Sinaloa cartel was actually born in Los Angeles, with one of its founders learning his craft here. When the Sinaloa cartel started expanding and putting its hands and started gaining control and traction here in the United States, you saw a calming of violence, inter-city violence with some of the gangs, because they started using some of the gangs to distribute. So gang violence as a whole in the United States has been at a downward trend. The Sinaloa cartel in a lot of ways has been a stabilizing force for some of that, which is kind of weird to think about. They've been the only major player doing it. Now, what's going to happen when another force of an equal nature comes here and gains control over a city, and they have to then fight for the drug markets as they do down there, basically killing each other's distribution, finding people that are under protection of those cartels and burning their businesses to prove a point as far as the powerlessness of the other cartel. I think we're already seeing some of that here in a lot of ways. It's not as in the open as you see it down there, but I think that's where they want to get. I think that's where we're headed if something isn't done.
I think when people think about cartels, they think about, guns and stashes of cash hidden in caves or something.
Yeah.
But the cartels have really evolved and modernized. I know they use TikTok, they use social media. They have conventional businesses. They run politicians. Can you just describe what modern day cartel activity looks like?
Yeah, modern day cartel activity looks like a political organization. They sponsor political campaigns. They pay for roads. They pay for career paths for people. They pay for immigration lawyers. So these are organizations that not only are, yes, guarding their local drug markets that they sell, protection rackets, extortion, trafficking of arms, trafficking of drugs, all of that is there. But also they've been investing in property, in commerce. They've invested in infrastructure. Some of the ports that they took over were already owned in some way, shape, or form by some of their financial institutions that are on their side, that they own. It's hard to separate politics from cartels in Mexico now. Mexico is one of the places where the most members of the media or journalists get killed. In Mexico is one of the most dangerous places to be a member of the media. And I think a lot of the reasons is because some of these media people are actually playing one side or the other as far as a propaganda mouthpiece or campaign against each other. It's also one of the places where the most political candidates get assassinated. And again, it's because how can you attack your opponent's candidate? You assassinate them. You know, you're a cartel member, and I have my political candidate. He's going to be a prime target for the other side. So they're very much intertwined in politics as well now in Mexico. Mm-hmm. It's hard to separate that. Independent cell phone networks. They're into mining. The fact that there was a Mormon massacre that happened in the Sonora Desert. One key fact about that a lot of people miss is that happened in the middle of one of the largest lithium mining deposits on the planet. And why were armed men there guarding the desert? Well, they're guarding mining rights. That's what they're guarding. And also they're guarding property. It's become very complex. They diversified years back. Trying to attack them as an organization that's living in a cave somewhere, just moving drugs across the border, that's a very antiquated kind of way of thinking about these organizations. They're very much settled here in the U.S. and very much settled in Mexico.
So the cartels are no longer just investing in drugs and guns, but they're investing in stocks and real estate and mining and politicians. I've always had this sense that you probably can't run for office in Mexico without playing footsie with the cartels. I'd imagine that would be the case, or it's probably like a delicate dance over there. Is that right?
It's a delicate dance in a lot of places, and it's an open dance in others. Mm-hmm. Some people just openly talking about this. And people can look this up. The president of Mexico has visited El Chapo Guzman's hometown several times, and in open press conferences has told things to the locals as, please stop consuming these Chinese drugs. What about the local drug markets and drug growers? Why don't you support them? This is something that the president of Mexico told a bunch of people.
You can't make this stuff up.
You can't make this stuff up.
Do you think that they have that kind of influence, maybe not at the same level, but on American politics? I mean, if they have tentacles in the United States of America, and they have cartels living here and they're raising their kids here and sending them to colleges here, what would prevent them from running people for office here in America?
It's been an open secret that, yes, they have political influence here in the United States as well. They have influence specifically related around the Latino community and specifically the Mexican immigration aspect of it as well. It's clear that there is some influence there on this side. It's hard to tell exactly where and how,
right?
But it's there.
I mean, it really does tie into my next question, which is immigration, right? It's why wouldn't American politicians want to have sovereignty in America? Over the last 3 years, more than 8 million illegal immigrants made it into the United States. I mean, that number is more than double years before.
Yeah.
How is this allowed? Why is this happening? I mean, 8 million people, that's more than the number of people that live in the state of Tennessee. I mean, we had an entire state of illegal immigrants come in through the border. And for some reason, our politicians are not making this a number one issue.
Yeah. I'll speak to this as an immigrant myself. And I'm not an illegal immigrant to this country, but an immigrant. I immigrated here legally. The process was very difficult and complex. And it was a very big strain on my family, but I did it. One of the first things that I was offered when I went out of the immigration office was ways of getting money from the government.
Like welfare?
Yeah. Basically all the programs that I could qualify for when I really wanted was a job to go to work. A lot of the people you're seeing on that border showing up are no longer the Mexican immigrants of the past that are here to go into construction or go into... These are not the types. These are people from all over Central and South America, Venezuelan, Honduran. People from North Africa are showing up. Chinese immigrants are showing up. People from the Middle East are showing up as well. There are people from all over. Ukrainians. A load of Ukrainians showed up for a long period in places like Tijuana. What we see on the Mexican side, because I've been on both sides to see the situation going on, from the first migrant caravan that came up and to the last one. What you're seeing is almost like an organized effort by foreign entities to pump people to that border. Buses that are being paid for in dollars and cash all the way to the south, from all the way to the southern border, all the way into the northern border. Kids being separated and marked with bracelets that people aren't too clear about the meaning of those bracelets. But when you speak to some of the people there, it's because, he's paid for, he isn't paid for. What does that mean? What do you mean he's paid for, he isn't paid for? Women being stood on a wall and being selected. You go, you stay.
For trafficking?
For trafficking. And they get women trying to make it their way across the border are already being selected and recruited. When I say recruited, I mean being selected for that type of activity here. When they cross that border and they get some of these organizing groups that are supported sometimes by Americans sending dollars down there, females will show up, putting a friendly face to some of these women and a safe space. I mean, a bunch of women showing up to volunteer help for you guys. And all of a sudden, you get one of those on you, and then when you go to the wall, men show up. They traffic you across the border, and you get put into a hotel room somewhere and earn money for them for however amount of time they have you there. Slavery is a real thing in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Mexicans in the past would cross the border and get basically put into some of these aspects of slavery because they had to pay their way here. It's happening still. A lot of the people that make their way across the border are now in debt to these organizations. A lot of these people will get handed over to authorities here, and somehow these criminal organizations know exactly where they're going to be placed, and they will get a visit in the middle of the night and a knock and say, "You still owe us money." So it's a complex issue. It's very apparent that it's being weaponized by foreign powers against the United States, this flood of people. Mexico is very much hands-off on it. It allows these things to happen. It just basically hands-off. It doesn't enforce its borders at all. And it makes sense since Mexico is currently living through some of the most anti-American presidency that's ever been in Mexico right now. So it's very openly against the U.S.
Would you say that the Mexicans are just disappointed with the United States and so they don't really care? Or are they becoming more ideologically Marxist? Who are they aligning with if they're not aligning with America?
Anybody that's the enemy of America is now a popular figure in Mexico.
Wow.
Vladimir Putin and things about Vladimir Putin on TikTok are prevalent in Mexico. China is filling a void that the U.S. left behind after Trump when he got elected and basically pulled a lot of the factories out of Mexico. China came in and basically filled that void.
So to them, the Chinese are like heroes because they came in and gave them jobs?
They came in and basically started investing in things that the U.S. basically started retracting back to the United States. That started a trend. Trump was a phenomenon, and he basically was used as a symbol of why, as a country, Mexico should distance itself from the United States. Historically, a lot of the U.S. foreign policy in Mexico has been very damaging. We have to be clear about that. Recently, on unclassified documents, it became very apparent that a lot of the presidents in Mexico have been on the payroll of the CIA, at least going back to the 60s and 70s. So a lot of these things are coming to light. Social media, communication, people are educating themselves now, and it's very apparent that there's a big push and trend towards anti-Americanism in Mexico. And now we have a president who's an open Chavista, open Maduro supporter. He's very much to the left of everything, and he takes every opportunity to celebrate the U.S.'s enemies in the media. So that's the trend you're seeing down there. And there's no political rivals to them right now.
People like them. They like this Marxist, leftist, anti-American sentiment.
Most of the middle of the country, which is mostly the electing powers in Mexico, they like it. Mexico is segmented in three parts. The center part of Mexico, the capital, which is very, very much to the left of the political spectrum. That's where most of the wokeness is.
Like most cities.
And then you see the economic producers on the border or in the north, like Baja and Monterrey, or more the conservative side of things, but politically they become irrelevant because of how this populism is just growing across the country. And also, many presidencies have been corrupted and have been just left the country in ruin as far as mismanagement. So, and that paired with the drug war that's going on down there, people are just done with all the other options.
So the answer to why immigration from Latin America and Mexico in particular is so rampant, is it because they're literally being pushed up, they're incentivized and being pushed to migrate into the United States? It's not about America's a great place, it's a land of opportunity, work hard, you'll get there. It's not about that?
These are the conversations that I've had with some of them. It's like I've sat with some of these migrants as they make their way. Some of them are coming from countries that have been destabilized historically by U.S. foreign policies for years. And that's part of the issue. Another aspect of it is this: a lot of these countries are better served by putting all these rambunctious young people onto a path to go to the U.S. and send back money. Economically, it makes more sense for them. And also, they don't want those people there because they don't want them to fight the government there. So they will legit make every effort to just cut a clear path for them to leave. It's in their best interest to do so. And I feel, because a lot of them talk about organizers paying for things in dollars or showing up down there and convincing them that Biden just got elected, so it means that the door is open. So let's go now. And they come with stories of that nature. Americans showing up there, showing up at the border, coaching them to say what they need to say to the immigration officers when they get across. It seems like an organized effort from a lot of entities to basically make it seem like the doors are open. There's a lot of opportunities and there's a lot of free money to hand out. And what are you doing standing around here? You're going to miss this opportunity and the door is going to close. It's the same narrative that's been happening for the past 5 years, I think, with some of these migrant caravans coming up. It's this: the door's going to close. Come now. The door's going to close. Come now. Here's money. Here's money. Stay here. These are the buses. It's a weapon. It's a political weapon that's being utilized against the U.S. in a lot of ways.
From your experience, how do America's adversaries take advantage of this? China in particular. I don't know if Iran and Russia are in the picture as well. But China, I know there's the fentanyl issue.
Yeah.
I'd imagine that anybody that wants to weaken the United States of America will use our porous borders.
Yeah. What I see is everybody in China is part of the government. We can agree to that, right?
They have no choice also, right?
Yeah.
The CCP will make sure that that's the case.
It's the largest intelligence agency on the planet, China, because everybody that's Chinese is part of this. Is part of it. There is no Chinese organized crime, like, per se. Like, they have these triads, the criminal organizations, but all of them work for the state as well. So there's no case to be made for China not knowing about the production of fentanyl and also the exportation of fentanyl and precursors into Mexico. There's just no case to be. So they know about it. So there's a country that is an adversary of the United States that openly and knowingly sending these substances that are going to come into the U.S. and basically decimate a whole generation of people. They are taking full advantage of the fact that there's a very corrupt and not coordinated government on the southern side of the border here in the United States. They're taking full advantage of the fact that they control at least one of the major criminal organizations down there, or in a lot of ways, because they supply them. It's very much a generational type warfare thing that they're doing, is what it seems. I've heard stories about generals writing about the fact that how you would fight the U.S. is to degrade it. So what you're seeing is a multi-front assault on the United States through its southern border, basically, creating an almost Vietnam-like setting where there's a proxy group for them fighting in Mexico and creating destabilization like that through some of these criminal organizations down there, sponsoring and fueling the fentanyl epidemic up here. Finally, gaining an influence and political influence in Mexico and turning your closest neighbor and one of your biggest economic partners into an enemy. It's a perfect weapon.
So I'd imagine that Department of Homeland Security and the United States government must be aware of the things that we're talking about.
Yes.
Which brings me back to, I guess, my repetitive question. Why are they letting this happen? Why aren't they securing the borders? Why aren't they designating the cartels as a real threat? Why aren't we keeping our country safe?
That's an interesting question. And I've been involved in conversations around the designation of these criminal organizations as terrorist organizations or not. And I think it's a tool. It's an interesting tool that the United States has put on the table. Why hasn't that designation happened yet? I don't know. The political will, the fact that it doesn't fit the narrative of most of the American populace as far as what they conceive of or think about as a terrorist. There was a long argument, and there's still an argument about that in Mexico, where this is just an excuse for the U.S. to intervene in Mexico, right? And Mexico is very traumatized with U.S. intervention, so they don't want any part of that. On the U.S. side, let's see if they fit the terrorist designation. They hang people from bridges and do horrible videos that rival anything that ISIS produces as far as that. And also ISIS learned how to use videos on social media from the cartel. So they do terrorize people. And they terrorize them so much that some of them have to flee up here. Right? So yes. Politically, are they politically motivated, or they have an ideal? Yes. They have candidates.
Right.
Do they have specific ideals that they want to push forth? I mean, there was a cartel member that basically turned himself into a saint, and it was venerated by some of the townspeople in the area where he operated. So a lot of them have gone into that route as well. Fanaticism. And they're very much an open threat to the security of the United States, and they've probably killed more Americans than a lot of the other aspects of violence that people are trying to fight here in stateside.
Do you think that it's because of their connections with the Mexican government that they're not being designated as a terrorist organization? Because if you call the cartels a terrorist organization and the cartels basically run the politicians in Mexico, then you're calling the Mexican politicians terrorists? I guess, is that the possible?
I think that's the wall that they've hit. There's no way of going after a criminal organization like that and designating them terrorists without designating other organizations as sponsors of terrorism.
Mm-hmm.
So if you do that, then now you have the president of Mexico, who's sponsoring terrorism in Mexico. Now you have the army in Mexico sponsoring terrorist organizations in Mexico. There was a recent leak of documents from the Mexican military. The Guacamaya leaks is what they call them. The documents coming out of there from the Mexican army, where they speak of, in this region of Mexico, our forces sponsor these people. In this region of Mexico, our forces sponsor this organization. Like, they are talking about how they divvy up Mexico in these documents, and they're in the open, clearly from the government. They come from them. And they're talking about how they favor one side or the other in certain regions of Mexico. Mm-hmm. So if the U.S. designates cartels as a terrorist organization, all of these groups are now sponsoring it. So it's going to be an Iraq of a sort. Mm. So I think that's the wall that the U.S. policymakers have probably run into.
Yeah, you talk about some of these global issues. I think that whether it's terrorists or our adversaries, they have realized that we're so stuck on playing the game with this checklist, where they realize as long as they use this checklist against us, they can just manipulate us. And so, they realize that they can use social media, they can run for office, they can invest in banking and basically trick the West, because the West is so stuck on saying, well, a terrorist always looks a certain way and always says certain things. And unless we, see that very, very clearly, we're basically going to allow them to take over.
There was a famous Mexican singer who just broke through and sang at the MTV Video Music Awards at the VMAs. He, through recent revelations, he was just revealed to be an operator for the Sinaloa cartel, and somebody that's favored by them and sponsored by them and protected by them. And he was on the MTV Video Music Awards. That would be the equivalent of having Osama bin Laden's favorite singer showing up there and singing there. And what the reaction of the U.S. would have been. But we're there now in another way. Yeah. It's a different way, but it's kind of the same, though.
Yeah,
I think the perception the U.S., the American perception of it is just not there. I don't know why.
I just think it's a little bit of like, because maybe it's Hollywood where everything is like black and white. There's the good guy and the bad guy. But when the good guy does a bunch of bad things or the bad guy does a whole bunch of good things, then suddenly you can't really identify who is immoral anymore, right?
Yeah.
There's so much moral relativism that I think some people in the West just can't wrap their head around the fact that, these cartels, they'll do some good things, but they'll do a whole slew of bad things. And if you just follow the Hollywood narrative, you don't know what to do with that.
Yeah.
It's like we're like little children.
Yeah. I think in a lot of ways, the U.S. at some high levels has probably treated the Sinaloa cartel as a tool, as a stabilizing tool. That's what I think. And it's probably very apparent to a lot of people out there now that the Sinaloa cartel in a lot of ways has been targeted more now recently by the federal government in Mexico in some of its segments. When 9/11 happened, these are the rumors that I heard when I was down there. When 9/11 happened, the U.S. government, yes, reached out to the Mexican government about, keeping an eye on things. But the people that were like looking out for any sort of Arabs or any sort of people from the Middle East in Mexico were the cartels. And they had instructions from somebody. So they're probably in a lot of ways an asset to the U.S. and have been for years. Things are changing now, though, because people are dying, historical figureheads are dying, and people are moving around, and the power is just shifting. I think perception-wise, at high levels and at low levels, like regular citizens, we need to look at the threat that is coming from that region as basically a fire that's being set on our feet by foreign agents. It's not just Mexico doing all these things. It's your enemies taking advantage of a highly destabilized country with an open corridor into this giant drug market of a country. There's blame on both sides, but Mexico is definitely being utilized and weaponized against the U.S.
We mentioned morality and moral relativism, which makes me think a little bit about religion. Mexico generally has been very, very Catholic, but I've been hearing that there are these new emerging religions that really surround, I guess, worship of death.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I'm misinterpreting it, but can you just explain to
Sure.
me what is this very rapid growing religion? And I'll add one more thing that I've heard about, maybe you can comment about this, is that there are actual musicians and bands that produce music that's very popular in Mexican culture around these new religions.
Yeah, yeah. So there's not just one. It's death. Death worship is one of them. There's also Malverde, who's like a Robin Hood figure, a saint, a forbidden saint from Mexico. There's a bunch of them. I think specifically what you're seeing is an open rebellion or revolt against convention and against some of the old structures in Mexico. The church is very much tied to the government in Mexico. So anything that the local populace can do against them is seen as a win. The worship of death in Mexico is old. What you see now is this, I think the first time the America saw this skeleton saint was watching Breaking Bad.
Yeah.
That's the first time people got to see it. And I think that probably caused it to have that negative connotation. Realistically, that skeletal figure has been prayed to and venerated for hundreds of years in secret as the only surviving spiritual practice from pre-conquest times. It's a religion of the marginalized. So that's usually where you see it, where people, they don't get invited into the church or they're not good enough for the church. So they started their own chapels, and instead of venerating the Virgin Mary, as most Mexicans do, or La Virgen de Guadalupe, they venerate her shadow. That's how they kind of view it, as a duality goddess of a sort. In the day, they'll venerate the Virgin, and at night, they'll venerate the skeleton form behind her. It's everywhere. It's here, too. Like I was at a Santa Muerte chapel in Connecticut, out of all places.
Wow, Connecticut.
Yes. So it's here, too, as well. It's, in my view, it's benign. It's not really something that people should be worried about. It is kind of scary to see skeletons and stuff like that. what I think is being utilized and weaponized as far as a faith practice down there in Mexico is actually some of the Afro-Caribbean things that are showing up in Mexico. There's a lot of Palo Mayombe. It's basically old African practices that coming through the Caribbean and into Mexico, which very much push the aspects of bone collections of the dead, body parts being utilized for spell work, occultism practices related to organs. This is more of an Afro-Caribbean influence coming into Mexico, but it's very much prevalent all across the country and even here in the US. These are desperate people, and desperate people usually focus on extremes as far as, ask who are they going to ask for favors or who they're going to ask for miracles. The aspects of Satan worship in Mexico is growing more so than the death worship that you mentioned. There's one of the largest growing faith practices in central Mexico right now is a faith around a figure they call the Black Angel or the Angelito Negro, which is basically a Satan worship, Luciferian worship growing up in the middle of Mexico. Again, these are all expressions of a society that is desperate. And it's done with the conventional structures that haven't served them for years. So they're looking for answers somewhere.
What does this kind of worship lead to? Does it lead to valuing life less? Does it lead to violence? Does it lead to condoning, I guess, immoral behavior? Do the cartels take advantage of it?
Kind of clear up a few things. Most of the major cartel guys that you see out there operating are Catholic. El Chapo Guzman's son, when he was arrested, was carrying a Santo Niño de Atocha emblem on him, which is basically a baby Jesus statue, miracle statue that he was carrying. He became the best-selling saint in Mexico after he was let go. So because it works, Yes, it's utilized as symbology, faith practices. It's utilized for fear, for control, and it's very much. I think it's more of a tribal thing. It's like our group is going to venerate this saint, and this is our culture, and this is our faith, and this is what pushes us forward. That's what it's being utilized for. And some of the morality aspects of it, like 10 Commandments, don't matter if you're not into that. Now you're venerating this black devil dressed like a soldier somewhere in the middle of Mexico, and anything goes there. There's no restraint as far as what you can do. Some of these criminal organizations in Mexico, not all of them, have gone into extremes as far as some of the spiritual practices. Cannibalism has happened in some of these criminal organizations on the guise of spiritual practices.
Wow.
Like if you don't eat this heart, you won't be able to lead these group of people. Things like that happen in Mexico.
What do you think a mom in Mexico wishes that her son or daughter would grow up to be? I know it's a tough question because I'm sure there are all kinds of different pockets, but in general, like, in our community, my community, for example, it's well known that we hope that our child would be a doctor or maybe a lawyer or go to school, go to Ivy League school and get a degree. And I think that's, by the way, changing very quickly.
Yeah.
But I'm just curious, in Mexican culture, a mom is raising a child hoping that he or she will grow up to be what?
Yeah. In most of Mexico, a business owner of some sort, most of it. Most of Mexicans, a business owner, a lawyer, a doctor. My mom wanted me to be a doctor, right? God bless her heart. Didn't make it.
You almost did.
Almost did, But then, when I was working in certain communities and I would go into some of these communities, we were spit on. We were the bad guys.
For being the geeks?
For being the police officers, for representing the government. And I have this clear memory of going into one town after it was cleared out by the Mexican military and not understanding, like, we're here to liberate you guys. You were under cartel oppression and stuff like that. But then you realize, all of them were your fathers, your uncles, your sons. So of course we're the enemy. Talking to some of them and listening to some of the conversations in some of the communities like that, they want their kids to grow up to be El Chapo Guzman, or they want their daughters to grow up to marry one of the cartel members so they can, live the life in LA or wherever, It's a dream for them. And this is what the cartel very much uses as a recruiting element for them. Cartels are recruiting through TikTok. They're recruiting through popular music. They're recruiting through just having being in a country that has absolutely no economic growth and no opportunity growth for its youth, which basically makes them get pushed out or have the only option of migration, or to go to work for one of the cartels, or maybe to go to work for the government like I did and basically be used up by the time they're 35 and then cast out when the government changes. So there's not a lot of options. It's a complex question. What do mothers want their kids to grow up to be, depending on where you are? And in the places where there's not a lot of options, they want their kids to grow up to be cartel members.
Is that partially why you left? I mean, you could live in Mexico, I guess, but you choose to live here in the United States.
Well, I have a daughter, and she's American. I have to keep going for her, and there's no opportunities for somebody like me down there. There's a quote that I read somewhere: "Be careful what you get good at." And I got good at a very certain activity in Mexico for 12 years, became very known for it. And when that ended, in Mexico, if you're a police officer, you have that as a career path. If you get fired or let go, or if you leave a police organization, you're unhireable to another police organization. You can't go into another one.
Why? You have all those skills.
It's a policy. It's a policy that they have.
So then what? You just join the cartels?
Most of the people that I used to work with, a lot of them, who have the same level of training that I do, and I'm nobody. I'm somebody that has a lot of experience. I train a lot of people here in the U.S. I have a skill set. I know things, and I get hired by the federal government to train their people. I've trained, you name it, I've trained them. And people get impressed with what I know how to do and what things that I can show. A lot of the people that I work with were way more prepared and trained. When the job ended for all of us, they didn't get the opportunities to migrate to the United States that I did. So where are they now? These highly trained, young, motivated, experienced individuals that have clear spoken English, they know how to operate in places like that. Where are they? Well, they're in the wind. And that's one of the big issues with Mexico. Every 5 to 6 years, the presidency changes and amnesia happens. So anything that was a success doesn't matter because it was from the past. So everybody gets discarded. They dissolved the Mexican federal police. And it's a lot of trained, armed people that some of them U.S. trained like I was. And they handed that policing process to the military, basically telling all those guys to just leave. Where do you think all these men went? So when people are asking what's fueling some of the violence down there, that's another aspect of it.
And what responsibility does the U.S. have there?
Well, the U.S. has been paying in a lot of ways for the drug war through things like the Plan Merida, which is a binational agreement with Mexico to send funds down to Mexico to pay for things like training, salaries, vehicles, weapons for the police and the military. And when I joined in 2004, the solution of the federal government in Mexico and the state government in Mexico was putting a bunch of guys in the back of a truck and patrolling an area. And that didn't do a lot. And what do you think the policy of the federal government right now is after all those years of a drug war? Putting a truck with a bunch of people in the back and patrolling an area.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, these cartels are now utilizing drone technology, fully submersible submarines. They're into cryptocurrency. They're into dark web stuff, and they're developing their independent cell phone networks. It's not even a competition.
What are you doing here in the U.S.? What's your new gig?
Well, I got here. When I got here and I started my immigration process, I was blessed at having beautiful friends and family here. And among them was a man named Dan Stanchfield, Navy SEAL reservist, and his amazing wife, Kelly. They were my host family up here. It's through them that I got to realize that the U.S. is a responsibility, not an opportunity. I think that's what they showed me. Um, I got here and I was looking for any type of job because I'm new here and I'm from Mexico and I work. That's my mindset. It dawned on me that most of the people that wanted to learn from me or seek me out they wanted to learn about my experience. I've been a liaison with the U.S. authorities for a while now, so I had friends up here that knew about my work. So I started basically offering up my experience as a trainer, basically. Journalists going into war zones that have to navigate things like police corruption and paying off people and what they can carry through a border, what they can't carry through a border. Well, I worked against some of the biggest drug smugglers on the planet, and also around a lot of corrupt institutions. So I could speak on this directly. I worked against a lot of the most sophisticated abduction for ransom organizations on the planet as well. So I teach people how to not get targeted for that or what to do if they do. So basically, I teach people how to survive in environments like that. That's a big part of what I do. I also consult for the government and on topics related to the border and border issues and cartels. And law enforcement agencies across the country, send me messages about, hey, what does this mean? Hey, we found this weird statue here in this cartel safe house somewhere. Can you, talk to us about it? So a big part of what I've been doing here is trying to make my experience and what I did down there worth it and benefit this country.
Have you heard about these towns that are being built across the Texas border where the north part of Mexico is a cartel-owned town, and then the south part of Texas is a cartel-owned town, and they're just a few miles away from each other where there is supposedly a border in the middle, but both towns are expanding and essentially becoming one large town with a supposed border through it.
Yeah.
And I mean, what is that? How are you letting this happen?
Well, there's basically they're trying to replicate what happened in Tijuana, where these two major population zones collided on the border.
Yeah.
And you can have a wall there. You can have tunnels now. What you're probably seeing out there is a very smart cartel realizing that they don't have to go around authority figures. They can just start their own town and invest their own money into businesses, people that go live there, and just find all sorts of ways to conceal and camouflage the fact that they're now funneling substances across that border. What eventually is going to happen is that when two major populations meet at that border, it's Christmas for them. Now it means that they can hide things underground. That means that they can now hide things in the open by having businesses that are basically fronts for them on both sides of the border, which is exactly what happens here in the San Diego-Tijuana border. There's a lot of that going on there and has been going on at a larger scale. But I think that's what they're trying to develop on that part of the border.
So when I drive down from San Diego into Mexico, I do go through a checkpoint.
Yeah.
But you're saying that it's what is like a facade?
Realistically, it is. Carry a squirt gun in your pocket across the San Diego Mexico border. Nobody's going to check you. There's military personnel right now on the border. All of the border functions have been militarized by the current government. Mexico is a military dictatorship by all intents and purposes. The people that you see on that border with the white uniforms, they're all members of the military. They call them the National Guard. They have absolutely no training to be patrolling a border. They have no training as far as being able to search and seizure things. These are members of the army basically just being put into that function. And it's already become apparent that they are colluded, corrupted, and are working for one or the other sides. It's Christmas. That's what cartel members say about the border right now. It's Christmas. It's Navidad.
Your messaging is pretty scary. Obviously, you're a very brave person. Your entire career was, I guess, about being brave.
It was about being reckless, more so.
Reckless, right?
Yeah, I think I didn't have a lot of choices, and I thought that was a good one. I always tell people I'm a cautionary tale. I think the only bravery was leaving. There. It is scary to talk about, and people do accuse me of fear-mongering or saying things that are not, it's not that bad. A lot of the criticism and a lot of the, not danger, but a lot of the static I get is from immigrants up here or sons of immigrants up here, but not first generation migrants know my story and they can tell, but others don't because they're separate from that reality. Whatever Mexico they have in their minds is not the Mexico that is there now. And I go back and forth still. So I have to go down there sometimes, and I've done training for the government down there before this president came in, and I could see some of these things changing, and it's very real and it's very scary, and there's a lot of stress and trauma on that border of people down there realizing that there's nobody coming to save them in a lot of ways, and that it's heading more and more down into the violence that we started off with. I recently went to a security conference with my former boss, Lieutenant Colonel Izaola in Tijuana. He told me to shave off the mustache that I had. Great interaction. He called me to see if I could show up. And what you're seeing now is that the society down there is screaming for a repeat of what we did down there to take back Tijuana. There's will there. There's hope. There are people that are willing to take that to bring that fight again and try and do something to change things. It's just that there's not a lot of them.
I tried to look you up on Instagram. I couldn't find you, but you had an account before. Are you being censored?
The thing that took down my 400 grand Instagram account was 4 videos that I posted up of Chinese state welding doors closed and using drones to warn people to stay indoors. I posted those 3 videos up, and my Instagram account was completely gone the next day. Not cartels, not violent videos, none of that. It was just 3 videos about China. It took down the Instagram account.
Wow. I thought your answer would be something with guns. Like, I don't know where you are on Second Amendment. Maybe you can tell me, but my assumption was that you did some self-reliance video on why people should own guns or something. 3
videos, and people that I have a large following, and they witnessed this. They were like, for me, it's a business. I have 5 employees, so it's like devastating. We're back at 300,000, so the people that follow us and know what we're about are still there. But it was very shocking to me that is what censored me, and it's also very telling.
Telling.
We do live in a country where the NBA players can't say that Taiwan is a country. So I guess I got to experience that phenomenon directly.
What social media platforms are you able to post on?
Right now, I had a lot of friends tell me to move myself to another alternative site of some sort, but I'm stubborn and I want to stay and I want to figure it out. So I stayed on Instagram for now. TikTok is strange. It immediately censors anything that I post.
Wow.
Because my name is probably on a list somewhere in China.
Right. What about like X or YouTube?
I have a YouTube channel. It's basically a podcast that I do, and I talk to people on that. And we get censorship a lot because some of the people that I have on are former members of the military up here or the law enforcement professionals that are up here. And it's a dirty word now on social media. And talking about anything real or news related will get you banned and or demonetized. So I've learned those lessons,
Yeah. I got to give a shout out to like Rumble or any of these other free speech locals.
I guess for me, it's like now I have to prove a point by staying. A lot of people left, but I think I tell people I'm the
last man standing.
I'm going to resist this. Yeah. You mentioned the Second Amendment.
Yeah, I want you to talk about that. What do you think?
I recently talked to a friend of mine who's also born in Mexico. He's Israeli. He went to the IDF, and Mexican national going into Israel and fighting a war out there. So we're kind of similar, except I stayed and fought my war at home, and he left and fought a war far. Great guy. He migrated to the U.S. and we were talking as both of us as migrants, like, what's the American dream? I asked him, and he said, a gym in his garage, a truck, and not having to worry about people coming to take your things constantly, and also a gun. Having the responsibility of having a firearm and being able to have that responsibility and have that respected. I'm currently living in Texas, and he is too. It's pretty funny, that's where immigrants want to go. I've been in places where guns are illegal, Mexico, and the only people allowed to have them are government and criminals. And in the middle are victims that are unarmed, that are following the law. So that's painful to kind of come from. When we would go out there, we would do eradication things, looking for poppy fields and drug fields out there. Every now and then we'd bump into a house or community and they had a shotgun in the house. I would unload it, leave the bullets outside and leave them the shotgun because I know that's their only defense. We're not going to be there. Imagine somebody coming to your house and asking for your prettiest daughter for a party with guns. Do you want to be the person in that conversation without guns? In a place where the government can't guarantee your safety and is not going to be around for anything? I'm of the opinion that the ability to possess a firearm or have a weapon and the ability to maintain the capability of using that weapon should be an internationally protected human right in places where the government can't do that for you. That should be a thing. It's not. When I came to this country, one of the first things that I fell in love with is that in some parts, not all, that responsibility is a right. I grew up with that as a responsibility, but here it's a right. I think in my mind, it's still a responsibility. Whenever I'm anywhere, like here, I know how to deal with a gunshot wound. I know what to do if somebody's overdosing on fentanyl. I know a lot of things, and I feel it's a responsibility for me to do something if I have to, because that's the knowledge I have. It's a complex situation here in the U.S., I know. Gun violence and gun running into Mexico and some of the issues that we live through. I was personally involved in some of the aspects of Fast and Furious in Mexico, and some of those guns actually killed some of my friends. And what that did to gun rights here in the U.S., the detrimental aspect of that, what that did to the U.S. I don't know. I don't know how to solve all of that. I just know that as an immigrant to this country, coming from a place like the one that I came from, I find great comfort in finding a place in a community where there's armed, responsible citizens. There's a difference. You can tell the difference immediately when there's armed, responsible neighbors around you versus a place where there's not that, And I went to live to Texas.
It's interesting that you bring up your Israeli friend because I think just recently after the October 7th massacre, Israel changed its gun laws and actually allowed citizens to carry.
Yeah.
Because they realized that even though they have a relatively large military, they needed citizens to be able to protect themselves. There's so much a military or a police force can do when you're talking about mass violence, which the world seems to be just getting more and more violent.
Yeah. And the U.S.'s response was trying to limit that. In Israel, there was a U.S. response to tell that you shouldn't do this. You shouldn't arm your citizenship.
Well, they don't want the Americans to learn from the Israelis.
I don't know what the intention was, but it's hard for me to respect any sort of effort to try and disarm people that just went through something like that. There's a lot of guns out there, and there's a lot of people that want to affect your interests, and there's a lot of people that are sick. I think more so than any sort of gun epidemic in the country, which I always hear that, and I don't understand what that means. I mean, you'll put a gun on the table, it's not going to do anything. I think there's a mental health crisis in the U.S., and I've experienced it. I just came from Portland, where the federal government is handing out needles, and they're getting filled with fentanyl-laced heroin from Mexico, and somehow that's a union of two powers there, and it's not only being fostered, but it's nobody is doing anything about it. It's growing, and you see a society like that, what can we do? Arm ourselves. This is one of them, And if you have that right and that ability, it's a scary time for me. When I came up here and migrated up here, I went through cancel the police, Black Lives Matter. I was at the Portland riots. I was at the Atlanta riots. That was my first immigrant.
That was your welcome.
That was my welcome to America. And the thing I say and gives a few people chills every now and then. In certain parts of the U.S., it's feeling more and more like home, like where I'm from.
Like what you ran away from, you mean?
Yeah.
As a woman, there's another thought that I have when you talk about self-reliance, and that is men in America becoming more squishy. I feel less safe when I'm around squishy men.
Yeah.
And I worry about I have a son and two daughters. And I know this might sound incredibly controversial, but I think we need more masculinity.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, you are a person who's had a lot of visibility into what real evil looks like um, across the border and here in the United States. Is this a concern of yours, how we're raising young American men?
I go to police academies and I see empty rooms. I see standards being lowered. I see a very powerful campaign of canceling the police that it won in a lot of ways. Kids don't want to grow up to be cops anymore, Joining the military is not a thing that a lot of people want to do. Recruitment's down all over the place. Whenever I get students coming into a class that's related to anything that's related to survival or medical management or anything like that, I tell them that people like to talk about minorities here in the U.S. You're the biggest minority in the U.S. right now. People that want to take responsibility and be better at being able to protect and or do something or being an asset to the people around you. There's definitely something happening as far as the woke culture, how the media is portraying certain things as far as men and how things are being labeled as toxic. I'm old school Mexican, I'm very conservative as far as how I grew up. My mom was Catholic. I went to a Catholic school and I still have the scars to prove it, It was pretty rough. But now being up here, I try and kind of assimilate myself to some of the aspects of the culture up here, but there's things that I'm in conflict with, being made to take a certain role in a place and not, take a, I usually will stand up if there's a woman there so she can sit. But speaking at a university, I was informed of pronouns. And I'm new here, and I went to language school, and in language school, we didn't learn anything about those things. And being lectured by somebody that's born in the U.S. about gender pronouns as an immigrant, it felt pretty horrible. There's a degradation happening at all. It's a full frontal degradation of aspects of masculinity and just being able to be self-sufficient, I guess. I have a 9-year-old. She's going to grow up to be able, hopefully she grows up to be a great, beautiful, powerful woman, in some sort of way, shape, or form. She knows how to put a tourniquet on somebody if they get shot. She's growing up with that as a reality, Not only that, but she's learning to be wary of certain people and certain substances and drinks. She has to. This is the age we're growing up in.
Wow.
The weakness aspect of it, the cultural weakness aspect of it. I am considered an extreme parent by showing her these things. So I think a lot of people out there are suffering from denial. They view these threats as something foreign, going across the country and telling people, "Hey, do you know what fentanyl looks like?" Oh, why would I? Why would I want to know that? Well, what if you find someone in your kid's room? Did you know they lace fentanyl into cocaine now? And your kid's just going to go out to a party? Like, why would I need to know all this? Because this is a responsibility. You're not growing up in the 80s. This is not the 70s or 60s. It's a reality now. And you need to be ready.
You think we're not preparing young American kids for what the world is going to start looking like around us?
Yeah. I think in China, you go and look at TikTok, and it's a bunch of educational shows and a bunch of math and equations and science. And here, it's a bunch of people dancing in the middle of the street and getting run over. So I think there's definitely a concerted effort in degrading that aspect of this culture. As somebody that's not from here, that shows up here and starts looking at these things from an outside perspective, it's very apparent that there's a very specific effort to, first off, cancel anything masculine or male-related or traditional structures around that, and just the youth aspect of it. Some of the scariest things that I've heard have come from kids in universities speaking about how Marxism is great, how Che Guevara was an amazing person. Gay flag, Palestine flags combined. And I'm like, you realize that you're not welcome there if you had to go there. I don't know. For me, it's an interesting dimension that some people live here in the U.S. They're completely separated from the realities of the world at large.
It's what our universities have basically done. They've made Americans dumber, quite literally. Yeah.
It's like stepping into another dimension when I go into some of these places and I'm lectured on why some of those policies of Marxism and socialism are great. And I'm like, Mexico is going through some of that now. It's not that great.
You don't want that.
You don't want that right now.
Ed, how do we find a balance between being absolutely paranoid, which I'm borderline almost there, to just being self-reliant and good parents and good citizens and making sure that we do our part in raising good kids and living some sort of normalcy in a very upside down country or world?
Yeah, I always say this at the end of these classes that I do is that, hey, I know I told you all you're a minority, but look around you right now. You're with your people. Number one is I would say find the others. There's a giant silent majority in this country that are willing to do what needs to be done to bring this country back. But they don't talk to each other as well as other groups out there. I think that's so communication and figuring out how to find these other people is one aspect of it. Our kids are everything. And anything that is related to not kids, it's pretty nihilistic and destructive and death worshipy, I guess, in a lot of ways. I've always looked for kids in communities. And if there's no kids around, it's a sign of something. So some of the woke communities that I've been into where there's no kids around, well, they don't have to worry about the future. So it makes sense that they're so,
selfish.
Yeah. Narcissistic and selfish. Educate your paranoia. Realize that the enemy that you perceive out there in the world also has a family, also has a voice, also has needs. One of the things my mom told me early on, and it changed my life, nobody's against you. They're for themselves. If you realize that and you realize what they're for, you won't take it personally and you can prepare for it. Educating my paranoia has been something that I've been trying to do since I got out of the job that I got out of, because I brought with me a lot of trauma. So I would say to all Americans out there, yes, watch the news, listen to people from the other side, because I know we have interactions and we want to isolate, but sometimes we need to sit down and listen to them. I think that's a big aspect of how we educate our paranoia. If we're worried about everything, we're not going to be ready for the one thing. So we start focusing on the actual threats to this country, the universities, porous border and people wanting that border to be porous, your enemies abroad utilizing and weaponizing your neighbors against you, substances now in the form of fentanyl being put into things like prescription medication pill format that you're not certain what you're actually taking. I mean, these are the threats that are there. And these are the things we need to prepare for and prepare our kids for. And who's doing that? What are the talks at school about? Where are the talks at school about medication being concealed in fentanyl being concealed in medication format? We talk about gender at school, but what about that? That's a threat that could kill your teenage kid. I talked to a lady whose 2 sons did pills and they're dead. And she wishes with everything that she could have warned her kids about it. But there's no resources. There's nobody talking about it.
Yeah, we definitely need to talk more about fentanyl for sure. Ed, I'm really glad you came here, not just to PragerU, but to the United States of America. Thank you.
Thank you for having me here. And I wouldn't want to be anywhere else. This place, this country, is still a beacon of hope for a lot of people like myself that come from a dark place. I came here with a 9-year-old on my arms and the money in my pocket. And I'm here talking to you and I'm listened to. And a lot of people like to talk about freedoms in this country, and I like to talk about the responsibility. And in this country gave me a big responsibility to be a voice for a lot of people down there that can't speak the clear English that I can speak, to communicate some of these issues, and also to try and to try and wake people up to the fact that we, in the end, both Mexico and the United States will need each other for what's coming.
Yeah.
And as a people, we need to come together. But there's some people getting in the way of that.
Yeah.
And hopefully people are more clear on who those people are and what their intentions are.
We will win. Thank you.
Thank you.